on? Hi. Okay, I just want to start by saying thank you for coming. This is such an exciting opportunity for me. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Katie, for setting this up. I'm thrilled to be here. So thank you so much for showing up in this weather and everything. So we are here to talk about what is healthy eating in recovery from an eating disorder. So to answer that question, I call upon a friend of mine, Albert Einstein, because I think this quote, can you guys read this? No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it, which basically means no problem can be solved in the same way of thinking as it was created. So using this kind of framework that eating disorder equals problem, healthy recovery equals solution. What this suggests is that in order to move out of an eating disorder and into recovery, we have to raise our level of consciousness. So this is not about what we're eating or not eating. This is not about exercise or not. This is about changing the way we think. And I want to use my personal experiences just to illustrate kind of what I mean by that. So I think there's one story from my childhood that I think really captures what my relationship with food was like growing up. My therapist used to suggest to me that my eating habits and my morbid obesity were connected to emotions and stress. I told her that she didn't know what she was talking about. So it didn't happen very often because I always adamantly argued against her preposterous mind-body connection theory. But there was one time where we were talking about McDonald's because I had visited McDonald's earlier that day. And I remember her saying to me, well, what did you order? And I was like, I don't know. And she said, you don't know? I was like, no, I just go to the drive-thru, I get the food, I eat the food, and then it's over. I don't know. And she was like, okay. And I remember thinking, my relationship with food is actually very simple. I eat whatever I want, however much I want, whenever I want. Why is it that no one seems to be able to leave me alone about this? It's really that simple. I knew that there was a lot going on at home with my family, but I didn't understand why that would have anything to do with my size or my weight, especially because I was the strong one. So keeping it together, even and especially when everything else was falling apart, that was my ability. My strength as a kid was being able to respond to pain with, it's fine, I can handle it, I don't need help. So when I was forced to go to therapy, I really didn't understand what talking about anything was gonna do. It is what it is was kind of my mantra growing up. I like to say I was a very left brain kind of person. So if I didn't see it, if there was no physical evidence of it, then I didn't believe in it. So I didn't think that what I felt mattered very much, or that my emotions had to do with really anything. I believed in willpower and control and strength, and I was proud of that. So when it came to my health, I was taught growing up that the problem was that I was overweight, and because I was overweight, I was unhealthy. The solution was lose weight, and if I lost weight, I would be healthy. I was taught that my body was the problem. There was no other paradigm ever introduced to me. So when it came to my weight loss, after my freshman year of college, it didn't really matter to me how I felt about it. I didn't want to go on a diet to begin with. I accepted from the start that I'm not going to enjoy any of this, but I am strong enough to power through it and just get it over with. So for me, it was a very cognitive process. It came down to math, numbers, calculations, formulas, and it was that simple. There was nothing really magical about it. I just started doing everything I was always told to do. What the pediatrician said, eat less, exercise more. What all the nutritionists said, calories in, calories out. What all the personal trainers said, no pain, no gain. And so I just did what I was told. For me, weight loss was a very black and white process. Anything that didn't accelerate the weight loss was sending me in another direction. And I was strong enough to just power through it this way. There was one governing rule that I knew about weight loss that got me through the process of losing 150 pounds, which was the less you weigh, the less you eat. So I took it upon myself at some point to say, no snacks, no desserts, no dressings, no carbs. The fewer their calories, the better. No days off. And that's how it happened. But after 1 year of extreme dieting, I hit a plateau. And after 2 weeks of seeing no weight loss on the scale, I reached out to a nutritionist. And I explained to her, I know how much to eat and I'm eating less. I know how much to work out and I'm working out more. Why isn't this working anymore? And so she was the one to explain to me, your body's actually hit starvation mode. You have to stop for now. I was shocked because I was just following the rules. But she was the one to tell me, the reason all of your doctors had no answers is because losing your period and losing your hair and not being able to sleep or poop, feeling freezing, dizzy, nauseous, fatigued all the time, those are symptoms of daily starvation, not sickness. But at this point, I had gone to my pediatrician, my parents' doctor, an endocrinologist, and an OBGYN, all of whom saw my weight chart and said, congratulations, this is the healthiest you've ever been. But until that point, it was my ability to pretend that I didn't feel hungry, dizzy, tired, nauseous, stressed, unhealthy, unhappy. That brought me success. The more I could deny hunger, the less food I needed to eat, the more weight I could lose, the closer I was to my goal, and the more praise I received. Plus, I thought suffering was just the price I had to pay for having been so overweight, and I would do so heroically. To me, this was about willpower, and I was strong enough to power through it. So at this point, my instructions are to eat more and exercise less, which of course is the exact opposite of everything I've ever been told. So these instructions are coming to me now at a time when, if I were sitting in traffic before the gym on the way to work, I would count how many minutes I was in the car, which was how many minutes I wasn't on the Stairmaster, which was how many calories I didn't burn, which was whatever I wasn't allowed to eat later in the day. And it really didn't matter what I did, who I was with, or where I went, because that was playing in the back of my mind all day long, sometimes longer. But now I'm being told eat more, exercise less. So that was in May, and I remember it was the week of July 4th when I got sick. It was just like a sore throat, headache, fever kind of thing. And for 3 days, I did the same thing. I woke up, I took my temperature, I took Advil, and I went to the gym. And on the third day, I got off the Stairmaster, and I sat on the mats in the gym, and I just started crying. Because I couldn't ignore anymore the voice in me that said, what are you doing here? You know that this is not okay. You know that this is not healthy. You know you should not be here. You know this is what an eating disorder looks like, and you have one now. And so I refer to this as my aha moment, because this was the moment I knew I had a problem. It was also the first time in my life powering through it was not a solution. So I called my therapist. I was away at college while all this was happening, so we hadn't been in touch really. And I explained to her that everything had gotten really confusing for me, because growing up, it was the angel on my shoulder that said eat less, exercise more. But now the same message is coming from the devil. It's the wrong thing to do. And I explained to her, I didn't know exactly how this happened. I felt like I had blinders on. I was just tunnel vision to weight loss. And now, half the size, my eyes were open and my life was gone. I didn't remember doing it, but somewhere along the way, I sacrificed everything for my weight. So I remember her asking me, are you happy? And I was like, well, I am happy. I just want to be carefree happy, not control freak happy. I explained to her the safety of my daily routine, having every second and every calorie accounted for, the peace I felt living inside my comfort zone, the joy I got from being in complete control over myself and my body and my life, the pride of accomplishment and the high of success. But I also explained to her there were a lot of declined invitations to go out to eat. There were a lot of parties I didn't attend. And I also noticed the paralyzing sense of fear, stress, anxiety, and failure I felt if anything unplanned were to happen throughout my day. She asked, what happens if you get sick and you have to stay home? So I told her what happened when I got sick. So she was the first person to ever explain to me this very revolutionary idea that the size of my body was not equivalent to my health. She started explaining to me, I really couldn't argue with her. I lost weight, but I knew that this was not a healthy way to live. So she starts telling me about mental health, emotional health, psychological, spiritual, social health. There's all these different forms of health, all of which were completely foreign ideas to me at this point. I thought this was what I was supposed to do, I explained to her. Eat the vegetables, go to the gym. I was just following the rules. So she explained to me, the problem is not that you are doing it. The problem is that you can't not do it. So for the next few months, I tried to establish some sort of balance by breaking out of what felt like a jail cell of restriction, control, structure, which meant I was forcing myself to go to parties. I was forcing myself to eat in restaurants. I was forcing myself to stop counting calories and to stop tracking my workouts, which meant every second of every day became a battle between eat less, exercise more, and eat more, exercise less. Nothing was easy. I never had answers, and I never knew what to do. So I remember a few months later calling my mom from school and telling her through tears what I remember thinking was the ultimate irony of this entire situation. This is the least I've ever weighed and the least happy I have ever been. So my intention at this point is to recover from starvation. But every time I tried to be a little less restrictive around food, I was just completely out of control. I was either eating too much or eating too little. And I realized at one point that I don't actually know how to eat. I never learned how to eat. No one ever taught me how to eat. And so I thought, okay, well, this is my body. This is my life. Adopting everyone else's definition of health really didn't work. So what am I going to do? And I turned to research. Left brain. So there were 3 things I learned that really changed everything for me. One, and I'm sure most of you have heard this before, diets don't work. I didn't know this, but diets don't work. So reading further into successful weight loss, like The Biggest Loser, Half Their Size issues of magazines, Weight Watchers, instead of being captivated and impressed with the weight loss, I already knew how to do that. I was asking, but then what? What happens next? And what I found is that dieting has failure built into its very design because the binge after restriction is a protective response mechanism against starvation mode, which is exactly what I was experiencing. And despite whatever the $70 billion diet industry wants me to believe, this is not something I could out-willpower. So the first thing I learned is that getting on another diet is not the solution. The second thing is neurobiology, and I think everyone deserves to understand how this works. When we eat food, our brain releases the neurotransmitters called dopamine and serotonin. These two, combined with oxytocin and endorphins, are what chemists refer to as our happiness cocktail, because they activate what's called the mesolimbic or reward pathway in our brain. So because human beings survive on food, we are designed to feel happy and rewarded when we eat it, and also to seek out a source of serotonin when our cortisol or stress is too high. So because food influences our brain chemistry, like every other addictive substance or pleasurable activity, and our brain is always striving to meet an equilibrium between stress and stress relief through any means necessary, the real question is not, how do I stop eating? The real question was, why am I eating in the first place? Why is my cortisol, my stress, so high that I'm using food to bring it back down? What is the pain I feel I need to numb? What am I starving for emotionally that I'm using food for physically? What is the cause to this effect? So it created a lot of questions until I found the ACE study. The ACE study proved that the more adverse childhood experiences someone has growing up, including a parent dying, being imprisoned, mental illness, abuse, neglect, etc., the higher their risk of health issues later in life, a whole long list of health issues. And so this was a very groundbreaking find for the field of addiction, because it started to answer the question, well, why is it that most people who try most drugs are not addicted to them? Because it proves we have to stop questioning and doubting the willpower of this adult and look at where they came from. What was going on in their immediate environment when their brain was neurobiologically developing to cope with stress? What source of happy chemicals were they conditioned to seek out at 3, 5, 7, 10, 15 years old? This was also a groundbreaking find for me personally, because it was now proven statistically that obesity works the same way. And it started to make sense to me that it was not a lack of willpower every time I failed at another diet or nutritionist or dietitian. It's that there was death, loss, trauma, grieving, mental illness, depression in my immediate environment, and that when I was 5 years old, my 2 primary caregivers were mourning the loss of a child. It's not that I had no willpower. I just didn't have drugs, alcohol, gambling, and cigarettes when I had to be strong as a kid. But I did have to eat food every day. So now knowing all of this, I started to understand my weight loss in a very different way as I did while it was happening, because I knew it was going on during my sophomore year of college, but that's because I was away from my stressors. I was out of a toxic environment, and I felt safe and happy and supported elsewhere. Physically, I was on a diet, but psychologically, I had created a new reward system. Because now, every form of restriction, eating a salad with no dressing, no dessert after dinner, eating as little as I could, I felt like I was doing the right thing. I was being good. It was reward. And every indication of being smaller, so comments from other people, trying on clothes, looking in the mirror, seeing my own body, were all signs to me that I was becoming better, more worthy, more lovable. So all of the praise and joy associated with rapid and extreme weight loss became my source of happy chemicals. And now it was dieting, not eating, that made me feel good. So on the surface, it looked like I was invested in my weight loss, but in reality, I had an addiction to it. So solving the weight problem only created another. Instead of using eating as reward, I was using dieting as reward. Thankfully, again, for my left brain, this is actually a known phenomenon in the field of psychology called addiction transfer. If you type this into Google, the first 2 things you see are after bariatric surgery and after gastric bypass surgery. It's not random. Because, like any diet, dealing with the physical manifestation of an addictive relationship to food or dieting or both can get the weight off. But without addressing the psychological reason that behavior pattern existed in the first place, I was putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Because what my story taught me, we can't solve an emotional problem with a physical solution. So the real transformation for me began now, when I had to eat more and exercise less. Because instead of using food to numb pain or dieting to distract me from it, I had to actually feel it. My therapist likes to say the floodgates were opened because now I was feeling everything all the time. Glennon Doyle does a fantastic TED Talk called Lessons from the Mental Hospital. And she explains, she compares her own alcohol addiction, drug addiction, and bulimia to the capes that were keeping her safe and strong. And so she explains what a lot of addicts have experienced, recovering addicts, where you take the capes off and the emotion comes up. And so I love that I was able to find this image online because it felt like this is exactly where I was. This is Superman crying in therapy. So, and so at this point, walking down the street, getting attention made me feel naked and exposed. Being one-on-one with people was really uncomfortable, unsettling. Watching the news made me cry because I actually felt fear, sadness, helplessness. And the fact that I lived in a world that now treated me like a very different person, it didn't make me excited, it made me depressed. And at this point, I remember going into therapy, crying about the world. There was so much injustice and poverty and homeless people and rain and babies, and everything was making me cry. And I realized at one point that nothing had actually changed. There was always injustice. There was always poverty. There was always homeless people. There were always babies. Nothing was different except me. I was feeling feelings. And I realized at one point that I was not a fighter the way I thought I was. I didn't face emotion. I spent my whole life fleeing from them. I used it is what it is because I couldn't go there. And maybe I said I'm fine and I'm okay and I can handle it. But that's because I was using eating or dieting for emotional stability. But now, having prioritized my physical health, I was mentally unwell. But this idea of health over weight meant that I had to actually care for my mind, my body, my soul. It meant that part of being healthy was expressing emotion. It meant that part of being healthy was feeling good. And it meant to me, for the first time in my life, that I had to believe in things unseen, unobserved, unproven, just felt. Because now, health went beyond the physical dimension. And so I make this list of priorities. This is my handwritten list still hanging up in my bedroom. So I make this list and I promise myself that I'm no longer allowed to act out of the old priorities. Now I'm focusing on health and wellness, feeling good, stress reduction over size reduction. I'm not doing the weight loss thing anymore. And so I promise myself my days of counting calories and weighing myself are over. And I had no idea really how to do this, but my goal was to be able to listen to my body, whatever people meant by that. And so I remember at this point, I was stepping on the scale every once in a while, not every day like it had been, but there was one morning where I woke up feeling pretty good, just like good in my skin, healthy, comfortable. which of course meant today is the day to get on the scale. And so I don't remember what the number was or how I felt about what the number was. What I remember was feeling my mood tank because I was quantified by a number. And I remember thinking, if my goal is to be able to listen to my feelings and let how I feel guide me, then I necessarily cannot also be getting on the scale. It just takes me right out. And that's the last day I ever got on the scale. So I was pretty skeptical of this whole mental health thing, but I started making a list and doing these things that I was told and I researched would make me feel better. So I started meditating. I started visualizing, breathing exercises, journaling, practicing gratitude, going to yoga, going outdoors, calling my friends, listening to music, going to therapy, and staying off the scale so I could focus on long-term health. And now, despite all of my fear, doubt, and skepticism, the less I focus on my body, my weight, and my size, the less I found myself in a binge restrict cycle with food. Because now, instead of using eating and dieting to cope with stress and emotion, it was this list of mind-body techniques that became my sources of stress relief. I was still getting my happy chemicals, just from healthier sources. And it now had been proven to me by me that my body was the effect, not the cause, of my mental and emotional health. And that if I feel my feelings, I don't eat them. And if I eat them, I don't feel them. And I realized that a healthy weight for the rest of my life was not about playing this physical game of controlling my body and counting calories for the rest of my life. It was about this psychological game of observing and honoring, expressing how I felt. And my weight stabilizing physically was just the reflection of my relationship with food stabilizing psychologically. And over time, my mind-body connection came back to life. And so there was this one night where I was cuddling in bed with my boyfriend, and I remember saying to him, Adam, I really get it. Like, I totally get it. And he was like, what are you saying? And I was like, I can feel it. Like, I actually feel it. And he was like, what are we saying? And I remember saying to him, I was feeling what some left brain people might refer to as chemical soup in my brain manifest as a warm feeling in my chest. Love. And the more I challenged myself to pay attention to what I was feeling, the more I recognize that my shoulders are up when I'm stressed, and my jaw is clenched when I'm angry, and my feet are tapping when I'm anxious. I hold my breath when I'm rushing or multitasking. And I finally began to feel stress, anxiety, sadness in a new way. And I realized that it wasn't that I couldn't hear my body, it was that I hadn't been listening to it. When it said eat, I starved and called it discipline. When it said rest, I went to the gym and called it willpower. But now my goal was to obey. And instead of denying hunger, I ate. Instead of denying exhaustion, I took a break. Instead of denying sadness, I cried. And instead of denying anxiety, I verbalized it. And gradually, oh, here's the rest, sorry about that. That's what your body feels in all different emotions. Over time, what I knew cognitively, it's time to eat. I'm not allowed to have that. That's too much. I have to work out, be strong, self-control, willpower, became overpowered by how I felt intuitively. I'm hungry. I'm full. I'm too tired. I can't work out. I'm so stressed. I have to work out. I need help. I can't. I love you. For me, using other methods of emotional regulation to deal with what was going on in my mind allowed me to hear what was going on in my body. Now I could be intuitive around hunger and fullness because I had coping mechanisms other than eating and dieting. So I think it's hard to know in recovery from an eating disorder what healthy actually is. Why is it that sometimes working out is healthy and sometimes it's not? It's kind of complicated, so I made a diagram. Left brain. It's still in there. So this is the health weight Venn diagram. I've used this with myself because it helps me really conceptualize how this works, and I use it with my clients who so far have said that it's pretty helpful for them too. So on the weight side of things, we have things that we can do to help us lose weight that are not necessarily good for our health, including things like hydroxycut, appetite suppressants, starvation. They might help us lose weight, but they are not good for our health. Then there are things on the health side, like snacks, alcohol, chocolate cake. They're on the health side because we want them, and we're human, and what we want matters. They're good for our health, but they're not gonna help us lose weight necessarily. But then it gets tricky in the gray area in between, where things like salad and cardio exist. Because for me, salad and cardio was either healthy or unhealthy, depending on the context in which it existed. So I think that's the tricky part that we have to navigate for the rest of our lives. So how do I know what is healthy versus what's not? I think about one time where I was working out outside, and I remember noticing, I really don't feel like doing this. I'm exhausted. And at one point, working out, especially when I didn't feel like it, was a sign of strength. That was a good thing. Do it anyway. Power through. But now I knew, if I hear that power through voice, I have to challenge it. That was not the answer. And so I start this kind of conversation with myself. Well, what are you doing here? And I heard the response was, well, I'm afraid I'm afraid to not do this or not be here. I don't know what's gonna happen if I don't burn X amount of calories. I don't know what's gonna happen if I don't spend X amount of minutes in the gym. And then I thought, well, I don't make decisions like that anymore. That means I'm not allowed to be here. And so I remember packing up all the equipment and walking back into the gym and just surrendering. I don't have it in me right now. And I remember all of the fear, stress, anxiety, shame, guilt surrounding the decision to let go. But I also noticed all of the joy, empowerment, and pride in finding the strength to do it anyway. So how do I know what is healthy? The intention behind the behavior is not rooted in fear. It's rooted in love. If you're eating a salad because you want it and it tastes good and it's gonna make your body feel good, that's love. If you're eating a salad because you can't not, that's fear. So to me, this also comes down to another characteristic of healthy recovery, I think, which is instead of telling our body what to do and having this kind of one-way command, mind, body, do this, don't do this, you can, you can't, it becomes a two-way communication between mind and body. Do you want to? Can you? Asking questions is what allows the voice of your body to be heard. And so while I do think health in recovery includes eating intuitively, listening to our bodies, using food as fuel rather than a coping mechanism, I think it even goes beyond that. Because I noticed what happened to me when my dad went from hospital to hospice care. The first week he was at home in hospice, I went to the gym and I found myself in one of the mirrors, and I looked up at my reflection and I hated everything. I started just picking apart my whole body. And at first, my initial reaction to this was shame and judgment. You don't do this thing anymore. You know, you haven't thought this way in a long time. What is going on here? And I started thinking, well, I was just in this gym just the other day, wearing the same kind of clothes and the same lighting and the same mirror. I can't look that different, and I didn't feel this way before. What is this about? And asking the question gave me an answer. You are critiquing the thing you can control versus feeling the pain you cannot. The second week, what I remember, we have nurses coming in now saying it's a matter of days or hours, we don't know, but it's going to be soon. And what I remember about the last week of his life was sitting next to his bed, holding his hand, and not being able to eat. I knew I was hungry. I knew I felt hunger, and I knew it was the right thing to do, but I couldn't get myself to eat. And again, I knew this is the only thing that I can control. And then when he died, instead of pretending that I was okay, I had a weight on my chest and tightness in my back, a pit in my stomach, and fatigue all over my body. Because instead of numbing it, I was feeling it. And so he died on February 2nd. My birthday was on March 25th. And I was having one of those days where my friends were annoying and my boyfriend was pissing me off and my plans were falling through and my dad wasn't there. And I remember thinking this is just gonna be the worst day, and I've accepted that. And so I was feeling a really overwhelming anger, rage almost, and sadness. And so I went down to my basement where I have a 14-pound medicine ball, and I slammed it into the ground over and over again until I couldn't breathe. And then I just sat there and sobbed. And then I picked up the ball again and I slammed it into the ground over and over again until I couldn't breathe. And then I just sat there and sobbed. And I went back and forth for a while. And I remember thinking, I'm gonna die here. This is gonna take me out. There is no way that this can be so painful and not fatal. And then something really miraculous happened when nothing happened. I realized that my heart rate came down and I could breathe again, and I survived the tidal wave of emotion. I realized I am strong enough to power through it. But if I didn't know what I know now about mental health, eating, addiction, coping, feeling, I would be using food, eating, dieting to deal with these emotions again. But what I know now is that Your emotions cannot kill you. But if you turn to eating or dieting for comfort, safety, pleasure, power, reward, control, etc., love, connection, they will influence your relationship with food. And so I think, I do believe in striving for intuitive eating, but I think it's also important to consider the science of addiction. I think they're both right. Yeah. Okay, so what is healthy? We have arrived. I think when we think of healthy eating and recovery, we think of food, exercise, the physical dimension. But as far as I'm concerned, that's the old consciousness. The new consciousness, I think, can be summarized in a revelation I had during a meditation a couple years ago, where John Gabriel, who was leading the meditation at the Omega Institute upstate, he asked everyone to call upon their higher power, God, Buddha, your higher divine self. And so I was still very new to any kind of spiritual practice, but I thought, okay, I'll call upon myself, whatever that is. But I was really focused and I really wanted to get this. And so I remember my eyes were closed and he said, ask your higher power to guide you, to protect you, to keep you safe. And I heard this voice very clearly, for the first time in my life, go from here to here, that said, I have been here all along. I have always been guiding you. I have always been protecting you, and I will always keep you safe. And in that moment, I knew. I got it. Things made sense. If the only way my brain knew to find safety was in eating, my body was not my fault. And if the only way my brain knew to seek protection was in dieting, starvation was not my fault. So I think health and recovery has two parts. One, a collaborative, kind, mind-body connection. And two, one that is rooted in self-love. Because I don't think anyone deserves to feel shame, guilt, or regret for seeking their source of safety, comfort, and protection. So I think this is really important because we have to live the rest of our lives with no abstinence. We have to navigate this gray area. I think if you're eating when you're not hungry, we're not responding to physical hunger. We have to know when we're not responding to physical hunger, because it doesn't mean the hunger isn't real. It just means the hunger isn't physical. So I think when we relapse, we notice symptoms of a disorder, our old behaviors are coming back, we have to know that's not a flaw, that's not weakness, that's not failure. It's just a sign that you need something, that you're feeling something, that you're a human being. I think health and recovery is about knowing that what happens on the outside, on the physical dimension, is just a cue for us to turn inside and figure out what's going on inside of us. I think it's about recognizing if there is shame or judgment in how you talk to yourself. I thought you were over this already. What's wrong with you? And replacing it with the way you talk to someone you love. You're okay. It's okay. What do you need? I'm here to help you. I think health and recovery has nothing to do with food or exercise. It's not something you can see. It's not something proven. I think, in my personal and professional opinion, the healthiest thing you can do is fall in love with yourself. And that.